Want to make a difference in geographic fields? Volunteer with the North Star of GIS and help build a racially just geography for a racially just world. Sign up now at northstarofgis.org/volunteer.
Be Black. Be bold. Be innovative. Show the world equitable geo.
We're coming together as a collective to celebrate people of African descent, the diaspora, and talking about geospatial equity and justice.
You're listening to the North Star Gaze, a podcast with intimate stories from geo luminaries. Welcome back to another episode of Season 3 of the North Star Gaze. In the first episode of this season, we introduced Dr. Adrienne Hollis of the National Wildlife Federation. If you missed that conversation, I encourage you to go back and listen to more about her work and leadership. This quarter, Dr. Hollis is guiding us through a powerful series focused on GIS and environmental justice. Today's episode continues that journey. We are joined by Maria and Michael Payan, co-founders of two critical community-driven organizations, the Sussex Health and Environmental Network, SHEN, and the Sentinels of Eastern Shore Health, SESH. Maria is the executive director of SHEN, and she has spent nearly 2 decades educating and advocating for environmental justice and healthy communities through forums, films, community events, and even after-school programs for children. She's worked alongside communities across the Mid-Atlantic to challenge polluting industrial facilities while remaining deeply committed to keeping independent farmers viable and preserving rural heritage and natural resources for future generations. Through coalition building, Maria has helped empower rural and underserved communities that often have little political power but bear disproportionate environmental burdens. Michael is the director of operations for SHEN, and he focuses on uplifting the voices of overburdened communities and ensuring their meaningful participation in developing sustainable, community-oriented solutions. His work spans environmental, public, economic, and social health initiatives across Sussex County, Delaware, and the lower eastern shore of Maryland. Michael has contributed to community and science citizen projects in partnership with the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health and the Center for Community Engagement, Environmental Justice and Health, with a particular focus on air and water quality impacts related to industrial poultry farming in the Delmarva region. Together, SHEN and SESH champion community-led research as a cornerstone of environmental justice, and they are proud recipients of the regional Robert Wood Johnson Foundation Culture of Health Prize. So without further ado, let's jump in.
Hi, Maria and Mike. Thank you so much for being here. Let's start with a general explanation of SESH and SHEN, so the audience is aware of how they differ and how they relate.
So Sussex Health and Environmental Network, we are in Sussex County, Delaware, which is the broiler capital of the world. We have the highest number of broilers, chickens being raised across the country. And on our Delmarva Peninsula, you have Virginia, Sussex County, Delaware, and the lower eastern shore of Maryland. That is a very high rate of production for chicken, what they call factory farms. We call them CAFOs, concentrated animal feeding operations, because that's one of the top economic drivers in terms of Eastern Shore here and the peninsula. There are often a lot of problems associated with raising of these chickens in this fashion, so many of them in one concentrated area. Sentinels of Eastern Shore Health is our lower Eastern Shore work. When you're talking about advocating for legislation, you're dealing in multiple chambers, right? So Delaware legislation might be different from Maryland legislation we're working on. So hence the SHEN and SESH.
And you guys are 501c3, right?
Correct.
Yes, that's correct.
Am I correct in saying that? Maybe a couple years?
2023.
Well, congratulations on that. I'm going to start with Michael because I'm curious as to how he followed his mom's footsteps. Can you tell us a little bit about how you first became interested in issues around the factory farms and how that led to your work in citizen science. And then I'm going to ask Maria the same thing.
Absolutely. So I started off with lived experience. My parents wanted me to grow up. I was born in Baltimore, but they wanted me to grow up in the country. We moved out to York County, Pennsylvania. When we moved to York County originally, there were family farmers that boarded our property. So when I was a kid, there were horses in the back pasture. I would feed them carrots through the fence. It was like this postcard, idyllic rural childhood. Eventually, that property was sold into agribusiness. What was horses on the back pasture became a cattle feedlot that had a couple thousand cattle, became 4 poultry barns that held almost 100,000 chickens at the time. And my childhood got quickly flipped on its head. That looked like some days you would get off the school bus and you couldn't make it to your door without throwing up because you had odors that were so intense. Looked like when there were, mass die-offs across the street, when 20,000 birds died, and they were cleaning out the barns with all kinds of chemicals. I was getting out of my bathtub with hand-sized blisters all over my body, wondering what was wrong.
Wow.
Under 10 years old, getting rushed to the emergency room with tightness of the chest. You grow up thinking that these things are normal. They must happen to everybody. But you quickly realize that's not the case. Something's seriously wrong. As my family's health deteriorated over the years, this became a very central issue in our lives. I spent a lot of time fighting tree farms and going to the Capitol in Pennsylvania, Harrisburg, to advocate for legislation that would hopefully protect us. That had a big impact on my life. So when we moved to Delaware, because of the health impacts we were experiencing, we continued the work that we've always done.
Sorry, Michael, I didn't hear you clearly. You said you were rushed to the emergency room. What was the reason?
So you had a lot of respiratory issues. One of the things we'll talk about later in the podcast is that these CAFOs have a lot of emissions coming. So that's that particulate matter. There's actually a video of me hitting this bush that was in my front yard between us and this poultry barn. And every day when you would come outside, you would see the windshields of our cars covered in this dust. When you're hitting it with a stick, it's just these massive clouds of dust coming out. You're breathing all this stuff in on a daily basis. You'll hear us discuss later on. A lot of the communities here in Sussex County and Lower Eastern Shore of Maryland, the asthma rates are intense. I would have a lot of experience when I was a kid when they would have events across the street, pollution events. You're getting tightness of the chest. You can't breathe. You're coughing. I always had a cough as a kid. You think this stuff is normal growing up, but there were a couple times when it was so intense that I had to go to the emergency room because I couldn't breathe.
Thank you for sharing that with us. One of the things I'm personally interested in is agribusiness, right? The consolidation of food production into very small number of producers. But let's keep on going, Adrienne.
Maria, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
I think it's a good time to talk about how our food is produced, right? When we're talking about CAFOs, a lot of folks don't really know where our food comes from. What started out being animals on pasture and small farms feeding their community has now been replaced. For poultry, we have barns that are now between 600 and 750 feet long. Think about that. That's larger than a football field. And they go anywhere from 60 to 65 feet wide. Each barn holds an average of 50,000 birds. Because of the genetics and the way that they raise animals now, they're raised, genetically so that their breasts are large because that's where the money is in the breast meat. And they're also raised quicker. Everything is about efficiency and profit. So each barn will hold 50,000 birds and they're rotated 5.5 times a year. So in other words, if a farm has 8 barns on it and each one is producing per year 250,000 birds, that's 2 million birds on one piece of land.
Wow.
That's one farm. Think about that. One farm. And now what they've done is there's something called no land farms, which blows me away because if you know about animal husbandry, the first thing they teach you is that you never put more animals on your farm than your land can support. Right? There's a natural way, it's animals out on pasture, they poop on pasture. It's just the natural cycle. Now, with what they're doing now, edge to edge of a parcel are the barns with no land to apply any of the waste. In rural areas, these are unincorporated areas, meaning that people are on well water with the setbacks because they're ag residential communities. It's always been a thing the past couple of decades, raising poultry. But it used to be maybe 1-2 houses they were a lot smaller than maybe 20,000 birds, maybe 400 foot long, and they were surrounded by a ton of field. This is not what we're seeing today. We're seeing 8 houses from one edge to the other, meaning that your neighbor is 200 feet away from these fans blowing out ammonia. There's a gentleman that lived directly next to, and I can remember walking his backyard, and there's poultry feathers all in his backyard. I'm sitting there and thinking, oh my gosh, if you have children and you're playing in your yard, children, they put everything in their mouth. And you think these animals, they're raised, they stand on their own poop. So you had this stuff in your yard now, and kids are touching it. This is too close. The quality of life of the neighbor is just totally disrupted. You can't sit outside in your yard because the odors are so strong. You can't enjoy your quality of life. If you like to garden, I knew people in Pennsylvania that had to wear respirators out in their yard to garden. This is insanity what we're doing.
I was going to ask about proximity to water, right? But I wasn't even thinking about water contamination. I remember probably 30 years ago driving from New York down to Virginia Beach, and we passed by the Purdue farms, and the odor was overwhelming. So I'm a little bit curious about the people who live next to you and currently live there. Are they just nose blind? Because the smell was absolutely horrible. Do people not smell it anymore? Or is it that they feel they have no choice and they just have to live with it?
Invest in racial equity and geography. Your donation to the North Star GIS fuels scholarships, mentorship, community-driven initiatives, and more. Give today at northstargis.org/donate.
So although you do get used to next to these and they become maybe a little less intense, a lot of people talk about it down here as the smell of mud. This is one of our big economic drivers on the shore. They're job providers. They're driving our economy. That smell of poultry waste, that's just how people make money here on the Eastern Shore. Those are jobs. That's our way of life. Although that is normal. People shouldn't be living with those odors. It is very intense. It never gets to a point where you go outside and you're enjoying this stuff is disruptive, but people accept it after decades.
At some point, somebody's going to look and say, maybe this generated jobs, but those jobs on average are paying $50,000 a year. It's not really enough to justify having this in your backyard.
And then there's an even bigger problem. We have 2 big industries here on the Eastern Shore, on Delmarva Peninsula. We have the beaches and our tourism and everything that revolves around good water quality. People want to swim in our waters, the fish eat seafood out of our waters and go kayaking and have their kids swimming. And then we have an industrial farming industry spreading so much waste on the fields that we're contaminating all of our waterways. These 2 industries are not compatible at all. And the one is threatening the other. We have beach shutdowns regularly because we have bacteria levels in our water that is too high. Delaware, there's a report, like 97, 98, 99% of the waterways are contaminated, unfishable, unswimmable. Right? So major issues with water contamination here.
Yeah, I'm going to paint a picture and add something to it. Where a lot of this industry is located is in often very poor areas and flood-prone areas, because where is the cheap land? In the flood zones, right? We did a report where we mapped the chicken houses out and put a line, and you could see by the beaches, it was clean. But if you move like a half mile over to the west of the state, it's all poultry production. Now, we have a community that had called upon us. This was part of Mount Air had a massive lawsuit against it. So we have a family, the Burton family, Gina Burton. Her grandfather was the first sharecropper in Sussex County, Delaware. Now, you talk about oppression and pollution and how this continues. This is a perfect, because when you talk about sharecropping, you're talking about oppression. Gina's family lives on a little lane called Herbert Lane. And the grandfather wanted all of the kids and grandkids to grow up near each other. So he left each a parcel of land right next to each other down this lane. Unfortunately, when he had cancer, they bought up a lot of the land. So there was this one strip. And when Mount Air took over Townsend, they put spray fields all alongside their houses. And behind them, when I'm saying spray fields, we're talking about the poultry processing plant and the waste from there being put through a system and then sprayed onto the field surrounding their homes. They wanted to expand, and the community was very upset because they were already dealing with all of this pollution and the odors. And their water was already, they were on water systems. When we started looking through the permit, we noticed there was already contamination. I requested records and found out, long story short, our state agency ended up writing 26 pages of violation. 26 pages. Wow. They have never, ever met their permit requires the entire time they've been operating, where the spray fields, the nitrates were supposed to be 19. They were registering 642.
What, parts per million? What is that number?
Milligrams.
Okay.
If you're on well water, if your nitrates are over 10, your water is unpotable, polluted. You shouldn't be drinking it.
Wow.
The bacteria counts were supposed to be under 200. They were 1.1 million. We had next door neighbors having miscarriages. Gina's son died at the age of 24 from an asthma attack. We had 3 birth defects, all within a very small region. We had animals having seizures. When I went and met with the folks on Herbert Lane to talk to them about what was going on, the community wanted to put comments in on this permit, I thought I was walking through Walter Reed Medical Center. The first house was Donna and Jane's. Donna had tumors all over her body. Her daughter was pregnant at the time and having seizures. The next house, I believe, is Gina's mother. Gina's mother had all kinds of health problems and heart problems. And then we had Aunt Martha in the next house, who had one of her legs amputated because of lack of oxygen. Well, what does nitrates do to your body? It robs your body of oxygen. Think about blue baby syndrome, right? Gina's child was developmentally disabled. And she showed me the SSI certificate. And you know why this angers me every time I say this to this day. This child could not learn, and it says right on the form, lack of oxygen to the brain. Think about this. For these industries, we are sacrificing our children's health.
Right.
And this is something that can be taken care of. They can be made to follow their permit, right?
Yeah.
When you have to understand the power of these industries and the influence when you're just a regular person and you live in what they call the rural code, right? Neighbor doesn't speak against neighbor, and you try to get petitions signed. If someone had the neighbor that works for the state or for the county, they will not put their name on there because there is retribution for doing that.
One of the things, this information is powerful. I immediately thought about how, as you were describing, who lived next door, who lived down the street, the peninsula, the value of being able to map that information is phenomenal. And I'm just curious, Michael and Maria, about whether you use maps, and if so, how have you done so? And then I'm going to ask you what's missing, what would make it better? when it comes to utilizing maps?
So almost a decade ago, we started to try to put together, first of all, when you go to your state agencies that regulate these facilities, you would expect that there was some kind of database, some kind of list of all these farms that are producing 250,000 birds in a barn every year. There is not. That does not exist. So nobody knows where these facilities are. They just pop up. They're out there. In order to effectively measure pollution that we're seeing, we need to know where it's coming from. So we started putting together a project where we took Google Maps and looked at satellite imagery to figure out where these farms were. There's 5 poultry barns here and 8 poultry barns here and 12 over here. We put together a map of the entire Eastern Shore, Sussex County and the Lower Eastern Shore map. That has been incredibly helpful for us with our community science efforts, because if I'm trying to figure out where people are dealing with the most intense pollution and what those, I need to know where those facilities are. I need to know where the important community landmarks are. Where are the churches? Where are the schools? Where are the parks? Where are the places that people recreate outside? Because those are all places that we want to make sure that we're not impacting them so that people can't enjoy them and use them. That has been a burdensome process, right? You want to be able to just database that, but we had to create it. But that has been incredibly powerful, because now when you can see where the most intense production is going on, you know exactly where you want to go do measurements to see what people are dealing with. And that's what we found. We've monitored ammonia. Studies are done by industry. Studies are done by community. Obviously, they look a little bit different. One of the studies, a white paper from the industry side, showed that ammonia levels were around 7 parts per billion that people were dealing with. When we're looking at the places that are the most intense, we're seeing levels that are 700 parts per billion. You're talking about 100 times different. And that's how you can change an area.
The state does have lists of where facilities are, CAFOs, AFOs, but are they complete lists? No. If someone sells a farm, you can't just transfer that permit. Somebody has to apply for a new permit. Does that happen? Not always. Right now, we have avian flu going on. And this is wiping out barns. And when one farm gets it, it can go to another farm. And you're talking hundreds of thousands of birds getting wiped out. This stuff is spread through air. It is not only affecting birds, but now we're finding it's affecting some rodents, it's affecting some other species of animals, which is very scary because that's heading up to, you know what I'm going to say, the mutations end up being, let's go back a couple decades ago with swine flu, right? That reorganized and then was infecting humans. I just heard, as a matter of fact, the former CDC, a gentleman on an interview, and he was saying that his number one fear was bird flu.
Wow.
Because if that comes to a point, and it already is infecting humans, we just had a case a couple weeks ago in the United States, and reorganizes to that level, it's going to make COVID look like an amusement park.
Wow.
So this is scary stuff.
To talk about the shortcomings, the mapping, and what we wish we had, that was close to a decade ago that we started that process. Can you imagine regularly going through satellite imagery manually and mapping where you see a barn and where's the new one and which one's inactive? We need something that's able to keep up with the changes we're seeing all the time. In fact, in North Carolina, I believe North Carolina Environmental Justice Network and some of their partners are working on using it to take a look at satellite imagery and identify where barns are, how many barns there are, whether they're active or inactive, so that you can have a map that's up to date with these facilities. That's something we really wish.
So is anybody on your team trained to use GIS right now? Do you have access to either ArcGIS or QGIS or any GIS tools that you're leveraging, or is this all pretty much manually done right now?
This is manual. We do not have anybody trained up to do that. When we're talking about community science, these were all folks from our communities that literally were getting on Google Earth a couple times a week and pulling up street by street. When you talk about how far we've come in terms of science and technology, we had a machine called a Bacara, which can actually measure pollutants in the parts per billion in real time. You can take this machine, put it in the car, and see on a computer screen how the ammonia goes up when you're coming close to areas where you have a lot of production. And so it's pretty amazing that now we can see this in real time, where before the communities, the residents always had the feeling that something isn't quite right. But who's going to do that science? It's not in the industry's best interest to be.
It's kind of funny that you say that, because to some degree it would be in their best interest. When you talk about 20,000 birds being wiped out, there's an economic impact to them as well. Industry creates more risk by being this large. When you talk about no land farming, when they are that large, the degree of risk multiplies. Profit is high, but risk is high also.
Industry has a way of taking catastrophes and benefiting from that. Okay.
Tell us more. What do you mean when you say that?
If you look up the amount of money that went to different corporations when bird flu hit, we have subsidies, incentives. This is all public money. This is taxpayer money propping up this system. I doubt many people know that building manure lagoons, their taxpayer dollars are financing these lagoons. If you ask the public, they would say, I would rather that money go into building up our soils, doing regenerative ag, doing something that's not hurting communities and extracting the money out of communities, because that's what happens when it's a concentration of this system. If you raise animals now in a way that we used to raise animals, some farms have to drive 2 states to process their animals. How can that possibly be beneficial or profitable? We just get big or get out. And here we are subsidizing an industry that is destroying lives. These are the invisible, I call them, right? These are the folks you don't hear.
You know, Michael used the term that the stench was really the smell of money, but it also sounds to me like it is the smell of death, right? The pollutants and the impacts on death. For many years, I have studied and looked at the links between geography and health. There have been a number of studies that show that where you are born can dictate what your health outcomes are going to be. And that is certainly the story you told about Gina Burton's family. It's heartbreaking and angering that this is generational impacts on their health. But there are things that we can do and tools that we can put into the hands of nonprofit organizations and the communities that you serve. I certainly want to use this podcast as an opportunity to reach out to our audience to ask for the skill sets they have to help support the work you're doing. There's no reason for you to not have access to these tools. So I'm going to use this as an opportunity to call out to our listeners and say, what can you do to support the work that SHEN and SESH are doing?
Yeah, thank you. I totally agree with you, Erica. When we talk about what you're doing now, you talked about the history of how hard it was to take a map and plot out the information. We didn't talk about heat maps yet, but Erica's talking about the tools that are out there and available. I just wonder, knowing that it's a challenge, knowing that there's a lot going on, what you're working on now. I'd love for you to talk more about that and how you're getting it done and what the impact of that is. So what's happening now in relation to everything you've just told us?
So this is one of the most exciting times that we have had. You talk about planting one seed, right? You talk about the North Star, right? So we had a funder, an angel funder. I don't even know who it is, who has funded part of community science. The first initiative that got us started there. It was just a very small seed. But I'll tell you what, that seed grew. Let me tell you what we're doing now. Now we are DNAing fecal filth inside homes that live next to CAFOs, factory farms, that live next to spray fields. Think about fecal filth in your house above your refrigerator where you keep your kids' cereal. On the back of your easy chair where you put your head and watch TV.
Wait 1 second. Let me make sure I'm understanding what you're saying. You are finding animal fecal matter in people's homes.
Yes, ma'am.
That's
Boy.
not what I thought you were going to say. Oh my goodness. Okay. I'm
Right.
sorry. Go ahead.
Groundbreaking. We are the first ones to be doing this kind of research on poultry. They've done it on swine in North Carolina with Dr. Heaney. When we talk about community science, we do it with Dr. Heaney, who is from Johns Hopkins. He's an associate professor at the Bloomberg School of Public Health. And we have a project that we call the CSI-EJ. Think about crime scene investigation. Kind of a play off of that, right? But yes, we are DNAing. And for years, this is what I'm saying, for years, residents have been saying something's wrong. All this odor that we're smelling, it's not just odor, it's health. I can talk about the years that agribusiness came in when 2000, I'm going to say six-ish, around there. And from that time period, like what I watched our family go through, my husband ended up getting cancer. He passed away in 2023. They were testing Michael then. And that was my last point. After going through years of rashes, tightness of the chest, blisters on the bodies. I mean, at one point, literally, I had the poultry across the street where they kept the mortality. It wasn't closed in. So animals could get in there and pull it. And I would have a dead chicken on my patio. At one point, I had put it in a bag and put it in a freezer, trying to get someone to correlate, like, why is my kid coming out of the tub with blisters? I mean, this is what it does to you, right? You're a mother. You're scared. This is your child. And finally, you end up leaving because the agencies aren't regulating the way that they should or enforcing. We're just the sacrifice ends, right? We're just the ones that kind of, sorry you live here, but there you go. It's devastating. So we have to fight that. And to think that now we're DNAing this inside people's homes, we were right all these years. We were right.
You know how frustrating it is to go to decision makers, people that don't live in your community or deal with what you're dealing with on a daily basis, and be told that your concerns are invalid, that your experiences are invalid, that what you're smelling, overreacting, you're crazy. Brings it full circle. That's what the dust was that was coming out of the bush and was covering our windshields. It was waste. That's why we were dealing with asthma and all these respiratory issues. We're starting to make those linkages now. Now we're armed with ammunition when we go talk to somebody. No, we're not crazy. We have the measurements. It's in our homes. There's waste in our homes. Go in our fridge, on the easy chair, on the Wii remote. It's everywhere, right? That is really powerful because now you can't be invalidated. You start to get some movement. You know, people are listening. The state agencies, it's not, you're crazy. Oh, we want to see your data. When we started doing this science, we had to co-locate our monitors with MDE's monitors. Industry data out there. They've done some research. Funny enough, the research that they did found locations with half of a poultry barn per square mile. With the maps, you can see there's a lot of places that have a lot more than half a poultry barn per square mile. They have like 60, 80 in a square mile in many locations. When we went to look at our monitors, we already have data online. It's already available. What are you guys doing this for? They want to see the data that we're coming out with.
Now they're working with us.
They're working.
I often think about legacy and what am I building? What am I leaving for something else? Maria and Michael, you're two generations. So Maria, you can already see legacy because you've built an activist. But Michael, what is it that you hope to build for somebody else going forward? What do you want your legacy to be?
We just want clean air and clean water for people.
Amazing.
I just want people to go outside and be able to breathe and drink water out there. Apparently, that's a big ask in rural America, though.
Thank you for saying that. It sounds simple, but it is really impactful, the work that you are doing. I can't remember the last time I felt this angry about an issue that we've discussed on the North Star Gaze. This is important work that you're doing. I am really believing and hoping and praying that our audience is going to rise to the occasion and that members of the North Star community will join you in this fight. It's important. Dr. Hollis.
I just want to thank you all so much for sharing this. If we had time, I wanted to talk about Steve and the use of that machinery. But I know we're close to time. Erica,
Wait,
are we?
can fit it in. What is Steve?
Yeah. You guys are welcome to talk about Steve.
Steve is a trailer. You know, the trailers that you pull behind trucks. It's a small trailer. And we named it after Dr. Steve Wayne, who has passed away now. They used to call him the people's professor because he was the first to start doing this community science in such a meaningful and impacted way to where it was producing results, it was producing research, it was producing studies for folks that they could use. So it was the start of all this. So Steve is science and technology evolving to validate exposures. People knew they were being exposed, but they did not have the technology that we do today. And I'm getting goosebumps. Dr. Heaney always says, this is what Dr. Wing wanted to do. The technology was not there then.
Steve is a mobile science lab that we're able to bring any location to monitor the quality 24 hours a day, seeing what levels people are dealing with second by second for 2-week periods to be able to get good grip on the exposures. Particulate matter levels 24/7 for those couple weeks that we're there with Steve, but a couple other monitors that we're able to put into this trailer protected from weather and bring to any location that we want. That's instrumental because especially with the ammonia monitors, these pieces of equipment to be able to monitor ammonia at that sensitive of a level, they're expensive. You're talking about $80,000, $70,000 in monitors. So historically worked is Hopkins will bring down an SUV with all these monitors and you're talking something that carrying $200,000 equipment in it. And they're here for a day, 2 days, if they're going to stay overnight. We hope that we're in line with where we're seeing the hot spots that day and get to the right location. But if we can put things in a secure place and protect it from the weather, we can hold on to those monitors, put them anywhere we want, move them around the county and really get a lot more data on what people are being exposed to. And that's what Steve has allowed us.
Wow.
And if you're driving around in a car, we would take 10 routes around the site to get different data points. But if you can put this on someone's property and have second by second data for 2 weeks, 24 hours a day, that really shows the picture.
Yeah, mapping to that extent is so impactful, important, and needed. The work you've been doing is hopefully replicable in other communities and just the larger picture, that draws for us, what it can lead to. Our audience needs to hear about that, learn about that, and support that kind of work. Thank you for sharing that with us. Maria, did you want to add something?
You're right. It can be replicated like they were doing this and still are in North Carolina with swine. Now we're doing poultry. This is being replicated and can be used in communities where there was no savior coming. Let's put it that way. Then, knowledge is power. Data is power.
Erica, I'm going to turn it over to you to wrap us up.
Yes, there's just one final comment that I wanted to draw out. I don't want our audience to think that you, Maria, and you, Michael, are opposed to agriculture. You are in favor of agriculture, if I'm reading your articles correctly, but you want it to be safe for the communities in which agriculture is taking place. Do I have you on record for saying that?
What we're trying to say is when you concentrate this amount in small areas, it is environmental effects, it's economic effects, it's public health effects. So yes, nobody wants to shut down agriculture at all. This needs to be done in a way that it's managed, that people aren't the sacrifice for efficiency.
And there's a way to do agriculture that is respectful of people, the planet, and animals. Regenerative ag, right? I encourage everybody to check out an excellent operation in Georgia who actually, if you do have the resources, ships meat all over the country. It's called White Oak Pastures. White Oak Pastures is in one of the poorest counties in Georgia. Bluffton. The man has a couple thousand acres, which is a challenge, land access for some folk, but he's doing everything regeneratively. He's got his own processing plant. He's producing food in a way that's not harming communities, but building community. If you can get your food from a place that's producing meat and eggs in a respectful way, protecting people and planet and the animals, you should do that because that's not going to feed into this toxic system we're talking about. You vote with your dollars every day.
And he's
Great.
a top employer in his county, and they're all making living wages. It can be done.
A great hopeful note on which to conclude this episode of the North Star Gaze. Maria, Michael, Dr. Hollis, thank you so much for your time today. I'm leaving this call energized about the future. So thank you very much.
Thank
for
you
having
both.
us.
Thanks for listening to the North Star Gaze, intimate stories from geoluminaries. If you're inspired to advance racial justice in geo fields, please share this podcast with other listeners in your community. The intro and outro are produced by Organized Sound Productions with original music created by Kid Bodega. The North Star Gaze is produced in large part by donations and sponsorship. To learn more about North Star GIS, check us out at northstargis.org and on Facebook or Instagram at GIS North Star. If you'd like to support this podcast and North Star of GIS, consider donating at northstarofgis.org/donate. Or to sponsor this podcast, email podcast@northstarofgis.org. You've been listening to the North Star Gaze.